You think you're being brutal with yourself, you think you're being harsh, amp it up, be an absolute fucking bastard to yourself while you're writing. That was a really, really important bit for me.
You're in the right place. And don't forget, you can listen to the full-length, longer version wherever you find your podcasts. Okay, brilliant, Tom. Thanks so much for being in the right place. It's great to get the opportunity to chat to you. So just to start us off, give us a sense of where you're speaking from and also how things are going in your writing world at the minute.
Well, I'm in Devon, rural Devon, quite near Exeter. I've lived on and off around this sort of area for the last 11 years, and it's kind of the landscapes influenced my work in quite a big way. And I'm feeling pretty good about things. I've had a difficult year because my ex-publisher went under basically without paying its authors. But I've now got a new publisher, and my new novel, which is called Everything Will Swallow You, is coming out on September the 11th. That was originally supposed to come out in March, so it was a bit of a disappointment.
Yeah, I bet.
bec- but now it's actually here, and I've got a physical copy of it. It exists, and that's just so exciting. It never stops getting exciting. That feeling when you see your book and it's real for the first time. I mean, this is number 15 for me, and I think possibly even more exciting than the first time.
That I love that. That's great. The fact that you, as you say, you've had so many, books out and it's still not getting dull. It's still that excitement, that thrill when you get it.
No, not at all. It's probably more thrilling actually, and the writing process. I think I probably get a bigger high from the actual creative process than I did when I was first writing books.
That's that's brilliant. Why do you think that is?
I think it's because you've just got so many more worlds to put into it. I mean, just with that experience. So I was like, I think my first book came out when I just turned 27. I'm 50 now, but I started writing it when I was like probably around 25. And I knew nothing, I didn't realize that I knew nothing, but because I read a lot. I didn't read at all in my teens. I was just like a sporty sort of kid in my teens, but I'd been a big reader as a little kid. And then I started playing catch up. So I was reading a lot, but still, if you look at the amount of books I've actually read, the amount of stuff I've put into my brain since then, like since around the time I was 25 and writing that first book, it's immense. And then if you think about all the disappointments of your life, all the people you've met, all the places you've seen, all of that you have. It's just such a much richer tapestry, and all of that is going to find its way into your writing, and the idea of threading stories from that is just it's a much more rewarding process, but I guess it hurts your head a bit more sometimes.
Yeah, as you say, that well is kind of deeper, isn't it, to kind of pull from?
Definitely. I think I had this idea of I don't know what the template was for it, but around that time when I was writing my first book, I think I had this idea that you just come straight out of the blocks and write your best book, and maybe your most well-known book or something like that. I suppose it's because I was thinking of like Goodbye Columbus by Philip Roth, or like John Updike's first Rabbit book, things like that, or Catcher in the Rye, just people who, or Secret History by Donna Tartt. These were the books I knew about, and it's people just coming straight out, and they're like super well known from their first book, and the book's really successful. But really, those are the outliers, and most people are writing maybe a few books where they haven't fully found their voice, and they're getting into it, and then they tend to write. I mean, a lot of my favorite novelists now write their best books in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. That seems to be more like the norm. Um, and but I've taken a long time to realize that. And I think I thought I was a failure for a while because I didn't do that.
I think the thing with it, as you say, even with books like the outliers you just mentioned there, I think a lot of the time as well, the thing that you don't really hear, and you unless you actually speak to writers, is although that's often the first book that was published, it's often not the first book that they wrote anyway. I know in some instances it
No.
is. I know in some instances it is. I've spoken to people and they've got, no, I just wrote this book and then I published it. But a lot of the time, they might have tried to write two, three, whatever books.
You're right. Yeah, there's something else sitting in a drawer somewhere that didn't quite work. And I think with me, I sort of grew up in public as a writer because I was a journalist from a very young age. Like I got the job as the Guardian's head music critic when I was like 23, 24. And and I think then, and I had a column and stuff. And then because the publishing world was a bit different in those days, I had a couple of publishers write to me and say, "Have you ever thought of writing a book?" And so then I wrote that first book and the ones after it. And maybe if I'd been in a different position, those would have been the books that didn't get published. They might have been the books that stayed in the drawer. And then finally, I don't know, when I was 40 or something, then I wrote the first book.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's just for the time being, let's just jump onto what you're actually doing now, so you can actually tell us about that. So tell us about that latest book that you mentioned at the top.
Yeah, so it's called Everything Will Swallow You. It's my third novel, and in some ways it was the hardest and the most rewarding to write. So just to give the background of my fiction, because I was all non-fiction for years. And then I dipped my toe into fiction for the first time with a book called Help the Witch, which came out in 2018. And that was short stories. And then I followed that with a book called Villager, which I mean, you could see it as short stories, but it's not because they all have an important relationship with each other, and they tell a much bigger story. But it's set over nearly 200 years on some fictional moorland in a fictional village, and it has ghosts in it and psychedelic folk music and all sorts of things. And so that was quite an ambitious book to write. And then I wrote 1983, which is it's also polyphonic in the sense that it's just got lots of different voices, different narrators, and that's more of an autobiographical novel for me. Which that came out last year, and that's based on my childhood living in a mining village in North Nottinghamshire. But there's some very surreal stuff in it that is not autobiographical. I did not
Make that
meet
clear.
yeah, I did not actually meet any aliens for anyone who's going to read the book. That didn't happen, although I probably convinced myself I did. So that was actually a very, very quick book to write. I wrote that book, believe it or not, I wrote that book in about 4 months flat, because it was all in my head straight away. And at the same time, I'd had this idea for a more ambitious, larger novel, which is, and I had the idea for it when I was walking. A lot of my ideas come from my long country walks, and I was walking in West Dorset, just above Chesil Beach, and for some reason, I don't know where this came from. I just thought, what if that guy I can see sitting on the shingle down there, who looks to be a guy in middle age, bit older than me at the time, was what if suddenly a creature came out of the sea and sat next to him, and the creature looked a bit like a dog but wasn't a dog and was some kind of mystical being? What happens then? And that was the genesis of the novel, and that's what it. And I just took that idea and I thought, wouldn't it be exciting to explore this? And it became this almost, it's almost like a buddy movie, but crossed with a sort of folk horror, but without the horror really, because it's not a nasty or horrible or gory book in any way, but there is a spooky, dark element to it at the same time, and it's about this antique and record dealer. He's in his sort of late 60s. I suppose around my mum and dad's generation, a little bit younger, and it's about him and this mystical being he lives with, who he passes off as his dog, but is actually his manager, his best friend, his sort of spiritual advisor. It's this hyper intelligent dog-like creature called Carl, who actually would rather walk around like a biped, but has to
He's
go on
got
all
to keep
fours
up the yeah.
to keep up appearances. But it's a book that goes right back to a 1950s childhood in Liverpool of the main character Eric, and goes back and forth, and it also has a levitating woman in it, and it's just I suddenly realized this is a hugely complex thing that I'm doing. Oh my God, I've sort of set something up here that is going to break my mind as I write it. And I noticed that I always do this when I'm writing. I become quite useless at sort of being a person as
Mm,
I'm writing.
me
The
too.
better I get at being a writer, I'm sort of useless at being a person. And I'm just very forgetful. And because I'm carrying this whole world inside my head.
Mm.
And that was sort of absolutely the case with this, even more than ever. And then when I finished it, I just felt so elated. It just felt so big. And then my publishers collapsed. They stopped paying me. So, and I also had a very rewarding editing process. So my ex-publishers Unbound, although they had various other problems, they were very good on the editing side. And as a kind of folklorist, stroke author, stroke professor who helped me with the editing called Liz Garner, and she was brilliant. So I'd got to this stage and I was really excited about it. Then this publisher stops paying all of its authors, Unbound does. And I realized this book's possibly not even going to be able to come out because of the situation they're in. So that was like the hugest anticlimax after doing that work. It felt like it had been robbed from me. And that was all kicking off at the start of this year. And then my agent very heroically came in and sort of really told me about what was going on and what I needed to do, and found me another publisher. And I reverted the rights to that and my previous six books, and that's kind of put me in this situation now, which is so much more positive, really. And I think it's better for the book ultimately. I mean, they my new publishers put a much better cover on it and all sorts.
Yeah, I love the cover actually. It's great.
Yeah, that's by a guy called Joe McLaren, who's he has now done four of my book covers, and I just think he really gets it. It's just really, I mean, a lot of authors have to put up with a cover that they don't particularly like, because I mean, I've had it in the past. Like I've had publishers I've been with quite in the distant past, just sort of saying, really, this is the cover that's got to be on there because we want to try and get it into supermarkets or something like that. Yet it's not a cover that's true to the book, and sometimes it can be quite misleading, I think, the covers that publishers put on books, but purely because they're trying to sell it. But sometimes that cover will sell it to the wrong sort of people. Whereas this feeling where you've got someone like Joe McLaren who's that talented doing these sort of lino print type covers, to just have that feeling that it's something you can be proud of all the way through, not just the writing, but the way it looks, it's a lovely feeling.
And why do you think you kind of draw? It sounds, across a lot of your work, you're kind of drawn to this folkloric kind of thing. And do you think that's partly to do with where you're from and where you live now? Do you think, because I know, in your part of the world, that is still a really, really big thing, the folklores and the traditions and all those kind of things and storytelling.
Yeah, I think it's more just storytelling really, and me thinking about I don't think I've actually said this word out loud before, but it's a palimpsest. The where it's like a document that's had other writing and then been written over and over again, and that's the way I see the landscape as I'm walking on it, and I'm always thinking about the stories, all the different layers, I suppose. And to me, that's the folkloric element, but it's really just storytelling. And I know when I did Help the Witch, quite a few people sort of said that I was maybe a folk horror writer, and that I wrote that in 2018, and I think that was just when folk horror was on the cusp of becoming this slightly trendy thing, which it is now, and publishers are sort of looking for folk horror, I think. But I don't think I was quite folk horror. I mean, I'm interested in folklore, but not mostly because I'm too much of a wimp, really, for it.
You and me both.
Like I think you've got to decide when you start writing a book, you've got to decide if you're going to write about something very dark and horrible, do you want to spend that much time with it? because you're spending a lot of time with this topic, you're living it, and I really don't, which is why my books have got, although they've got creepy or spooky elements to them, I think there's a lot of quite upbeat and positive stuff, and I'm more interested in exploring human nature and actually the positive side of human nature as well, not so much the dark side, actually. I just want to write my kind of books.
Yeah, totally agree. Well, as we kind of move towards wrapping things up, you've obviously had this long writing career now. You've had lots and lots of different experiences across lots of different genres and things. What would you say has been either the best piece of creative advice that you kind of think yourself that you've kind of developed over the period of time that you've been doing it, or something that you've heard or read that's kind of resonated with you and that you think's useful for writers that are starting out or maybe halfway through their journey or whatever?
Um, I would say like the two most influential things that have happened to me. I think the most influential of all was when I had my first very brutal editor who almost made me cry. I I always will remember what he did on this book. It was the second book I wrote about golf. I wrote about my year as pretty much Britain's worst pro golfer, which was a miserable experience at the actual playing, but actually really good fun to write about.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
happiness writes white thing. I think that's attributed to
yeah,
Shakespeare. It's kind of like, well, that really showed me if you've had quite a miserable experience, then you can turn that into something quite good.
yeah.
And I thought it's the best book I'd written to that point. I think I was 31, and sent it over to him, and he was a guy called Tristan Jones who worked at Jonathan Cape, the sports yellow jersey was the sports arm of Jonathan Cape. He had very beautiful handwriting, and he kind of sent me the manuscript back, and there were marks all over it, and I was like, I can't believe it. And then I went back to it, calmed down after a few days, and went, actually, some of these are only like suggestions, and also he's really, really good, and he
Mm,
turned it into a better book. And then I started being a lot more brutal with myself. I started realizing, you think you're being brutal with yourself, you think you're being harsh, amp it up, be an absolute fucking bastard to yourself while you're writing. That was a really, really important bit for me. And then and I also there was a guy Douglas Kennedy, I guess what you'd call a mid-list novelist, but who'd had a couple of thrillers that had sold really, really well. I interviewed him, I think, for the Times a few years before that, and it's just, I mean, it's a real cliche in a way, but no one had ever said it to me before, and I still think it's true. Which is, he said, being a writer is like being a shark. You stop moving and you die. And I still feel that. I just feel like the kind of momentum thing's really important. And now it's not even a question because writing's like an extra limb for me. I'm like, if I'm not, I need breaks, but if I'm not writing, I start to get a bit strange. I start to get a bit sad and strange if I'm
yeah,
not doing some writing almost every day.
I totally agree. Well, as we kind of wrap things up, why don't you just remind people about the latest book, where they can find it, and also where they can find out more about you online and everything?
Oh, well, the latest book is called Everything Will Swallow You, and I'm encouraging people to buy it from independent shops. My previous novel also just came out in paperback, which is 1983. I also, if people can't buy it from independents, I also kind of send them towards Blackwell's because particularly if they're overseas, Blackwell's do free international shipping, and they're also doing some signed copies on pre-orders for Everything Will Swallow You. If this is coming out before the release date, then that would be a really good way to get a signed copy. And then for me, I'm all my writing's going out through Ghost now, but it actually, if people went to my website, which is tom-cox.com, they'd find all my latest writing on there, really. And I am on a couple of the social media things as well, but I'm hoping to not spend too much time on those and once the book's out.
Yeah, it's difficult. Well, it's been such good fun talking to you, Tom. Thanks for being in the right place.
Oh, thank you very much for having me, Wayne. I've enjoyed it.
And don't forget, you can listen to the full length, longer version wherever you find your podcasts.